There is a saying, the best things in life are simple. And other sayings have grown out of this. There's something that's kind of a paradox. It says, the simplest things in life are usually the most difficult. Turning off all phones. Thank you. That was timed perfectly, okay? Everybody on vibration or off. The simplest things in life are usually the most difficult. I'll give you an example. These 3 words. I love you. Everybody say that once. I love you. Pretty simple, huh? One more time. I love you. Simple. My dad couldn't say these words. My dad was 40 when I was born. I was number 5 out of 6. I don't remember him saying it to me once in my life. Now, he loved me. Oh my God, did he work for all of his 6 children. He was so proud of me in the seminary and all, but it wasn't in his vocabulary. A lot of men are like that. And most of the men that come to me who are troubled and come to speak to me, most of them, I ask them, did your dad used to say very often to you, I love you? And most will say, never. Well, when he'd been drinking maybe, but other than that. So simple, so simple. You know, in AA, they have an acronym. It's KISS. KISS. And it stands for this. Keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. And in AA, they say to alcoholics, because they have a disease, they cannot drink without losing control. So they say, don't make it complicated, make it simple. Do the simple so you don't get confused with the complicated. So here we have today Jesus giving a message, and this is his farewell message. He tips the scale, he tells us, I'm going to be leaving. I'm returning to the Father. And when I go to the Father, and in another place he says, only if I go to the Father can we send our Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the Advocate. And this Spirit will come and teach you everything the Father wants you to know. He'll remind you of everything I've taught you, and he will give you peace. He said, don't be afraid. Just allow this Spirit of God to come. So here we are liturgically at the very end of the Easter season. This Sunday, then next Sunday, we celebrate the Ascension when he leaves, as he said he would in today's Gospel. And then the following week, Pentecost, where the Spirit of God is poured out on the early church. And then they are completely changed, like what we hear in the second reading today. Why this message is so important today is how he starts. And I have to say, I would be hard-pressed to find a better reading for First Communion. Boys and girls, if you remember nothing about this day, of course you'll remember receiving your communion, but remember these words that Jesus said when he opened the gospel today. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And the Father and I will dwell in you. We will live in you. Keep my commandment. Now, was Jesus speaking about the 10 Commandments? Oh, who said that? Who said that? Where'd that no come from, really? Who said no? Oh, they're afraid, huh? He was not, oh yes, he was not speaking about the 10 Commandments. What was the commandment he was speaking about? Anybody? Love. And you'll remember that there was a time when a Pharisee came up to him and said, Jesus, what is the most important commandment? The most important, numero uno. What is it? Yes, but instead of just, now I got you answering everything good. He said, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, which is the Shema. The Jews said this as often as we make the sign of the cross. They said the Shema, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then he said, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So when he was asked what's the most, numero uno, commandment, he gave 3. The only thing I would say is even though he gave it in that order, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, love your neighbor as you love yourself, I would propose to you it works the other way around. If you love yourself, really, you respect and honor and love who you are, you say, I am beautiful in God's eyes. I am God's favorite. Everyone gets to say that, and it's true. We are all God's favorite. And if we start there, I tell you, it's not too difficult to love other people. And when we're doing that, loving ourselves and loving other people, we're already loving God because God is love. God is love. And to live in love is to live in God, and God lives in us. But today, in this gospel, which fits so beautifully with this communion because Jesus kept it simple too. The night before he died was another time that he was leaving his disciples. And he had predicted he was going to have to die. And so on the night before he died, he had a meal. In fact, it was the Passover meal. And he said these words. He picked up a piece of bread and he said, "This is my body, eat it." Then he took a cup of wine and said, "This is my blood, drink it." It can't get much more simple than that. He says, I'm the bread of life. Whoever eats this bread, whoever eats me and drinks me will never be hungry, they'll never die, they'll live forever. And of course, Jesus is speaking about a way that he wants to live in us and we live in him. So he says, keep my commandment. Love. Love. And in love, I will live in you and you will live in me. My Father and I will move into your house, your spirit, your soul. We're going to move into you and live in you. It is so simple. Now, today in the first reading, it's the same reading we had on Friday, I think, together at Mass. And what happened was the church was falling apart because there was a small group of Jews who had become Christians, but Paul went about preaching to all these Gentile communities, those who weren't Jews. And soon the church looked like this. All these Gentiles and just a few Jews. But the Jews followed 613 laws faithfully. And they wanted the Gentiles to follow 613 laws. And they said, what? What? We're not going to follow 613 laws. And a fight began to break out. Not this kind, but in words. So finally, the leaders said, we have got to solve this or we're going to pull the church apart completely. They're not loving each other. So they went up to Jerusalem and consulted with the other elders, and they prayed about it, and they listened to the Spirit who taught them what the Father always wanted them to do, to love. To love. So this is what they did back to where they had been preaching, Paul and Barnabas and some others, and they went back and they said, look it. We've talked about this, we've prayed about this, and look it, we don't want to upset you. We want you to follow Jesus and to know him and love him and walk with him all through your life. So we're not going to ask all those rules of you. Only going to ask 4, which were listed in the reading today. Just do these 4, because these are particularly offensive to Jews. Do these 4, and it'll all be all right. And with that act of love to the Gentiles, the church not only held together, but it grew. Here we are 2,000 years later because of that act of love. I tell you, today is about doing something for the first time, even if, because every once in a while, somebody, when they're 4, gets away from their mommy and daddy, about 4 people ahead of them comes up and receives communion. The priest doesn't know and gives them communion. That was their first communion, but they didn't even know what it was. They just wanted it because they see everybody else getting it. But that's not your first communion, even if it is your first communion. The first communion is today when you've prepared and you understand, and when you want Jesus to live in you, and when you say, come to me, Jesus, come into me, Jesus, live in me, feed me, show me, teach me, guide me. And when we open up our heart and spirit and we receive communion, we eat and drink the Eucharist, we say, Jesus, you are food. You're food for my spirit. Come into me. And the food is not just that host. That's the way that we understand and celebrate but it is to welcome Jesus into us. And what are we welcoming? Every single word he taught us. And we know what those words are. It's mostly words of love. You must love by being compassionate, by being caring, by serving, by forgiving, by asking for forgiveness, by letting others go first, by deciding always to do the good thing. When we do those words of Jesus, when we live his command to love, he says, I will live in you, the Father will live in you, and I will pour out my Spirit upon you. Today, boys and girls, this is an incredible day. You'll never forget this day, ever. Ever. I remember mine, it was, oh my gosh, it was like, 58 years ago. I remember what I wore. I remember where I sat in the church. Because it is so extraordinary. It's the first time that you welcome Jesus Christ completely into you in this sacrament of love. So we are here with you today. We continue our Mass praying for you, surrounding you with love, and making this day an unforgettable day, a day that you will always cherish because you will know that today and for the rest of your life you welcome Christ into you as food, as drink, as life.